Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Chris Murray, and I'm the Technical Marketing Manager at Epic on the Enterprise team. Welcome to our webinar on Datasmith. Today, we're going to be looking at a lot of new and interesting things. You probably have heard a little bit about Datasmith, and we're going to cover a lot of that today. That's what this whole webinar is about. So thanks for joining us, and let's dive right in. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover some of the top things you need to know about Datasmith. I'll explain exactly what it does and what it doesn't do. We'll be looking at the differences between the CAD and the 3ds Max importers. I'll be showing you some workflows. I'll be showing you some actual file translations. We'll also be taking a look at some tips for success. So we have a lot to cover. Also in the webinar today, you probably have already noticed that on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat room. A lot of you are already chatting. That's great. We want to definitely see that interaction. I'm also going to put up some classroom polls at some times throughout the webinar today to interact a little bit so I can understand where everybody's at and what everybody is doing, what tools you're using, that sort of thing. So watch out for those polls. I'd love to hear from you on those. When you're using the chat, if you notice in the little field where you enter in your question or comment, there's a little button immediately to the left of that field. If you click that button, you'll get the option to submit your comment as a question. I would ask that you do that, please, because that diverts your question into our control panel where it separates out questions from comments. And when we get to the Q&A, it'll make it a lot easier to call out the questions that have been asked. So we want to make sure that we capture those. We'll be doing Q&A at the end. And also after this webinar, I'll be mailing out a survey. And actually, I'll be mailing out two things. You'll be getting a survey and the link to the replay of this webinar. They'll both be in the same email. So it's really important for us to hear what you think about our webinars, what we can improve, what we did great. So please take some time to fill out that survey, and we'd really appreciate it. One more thing, I just wanted to let you know that I am in the chat room live. This part of the webinar is recorded. We respect your time. We want to make sure that we cover everything in an efficient manner. So even though this webinar is recorded, I am actually present in the chat room live and engaging with all of you real time. So don't worry, it's not some automated bot that's in the chat room. It's actually me. So let's go ahead and keep moving. So if you're new to Datasmith, you might also be new to Unreal Engine. And just a quick overview of what Unreal Engine is all about. Unreal Engine comes from Epic Games, and Epic Games has been around for 18 years, and we have a really great legacy of making some fantastic looking games like Unreal Tournament and Fortnite you may have heard about, and of course Robo Recall. We're an enterprise team within Epic Games, and our focus is solely on anything that is non-games. So design visualization, automotive, engineering, construction, entertainment, virtual production, linear, real-time films, those sorts of things. So we have a dedicated team that's focused solely on those business challenges and issues, and we're here to make sure that your needs are addressed within the engine. The engine is everywhere. You're not alone in using Unreal Engine. If you're new to Unreal Engine, there's over 3 million users worldwide, and of course you've probably discovered, if you've downloaded the engine already, that it's completely free. The free version includes the full tool set and source code. So before we dive into Datasmith, I just want to mention briefly the other webinars that we've been hosting that some of you may have seen. Previously, we've been hosting the AEC series of webinars. We have 4 webinars so far in the bank. We have 1 left. Product design series, we've completed 2 webinars. We have 2 remaining. And obviously today is all about Datasmith. So again, keep an eye out for the future webinars. November 30th is the AEC webinar for VR production, and early 2018 for our product design webinars. So at SIGGRAPH this year, you may have seen or heard the news about Datasmith. And the goal of Datasmith at that time that we were showing on stage at SIGGRAPH was achieving frictionless workflows with large-scale data sets in design visualization and manufacturing. And that's, of course, when we announced the registration for the beta. The beta is still ongoing. Some of you may have registered and not received the invite yet. That's okay. We had an overwhelming response to the beta, and so we are getting those invitations out as quickly as we can. We kind of roll them out because if we let everybody in all at once, it would really overwhelm things, and we want to make sure that we're able to deliver a good customer experience as well. So be patient if you haven't received it yet. If you have received it and you've been playing with it, we're glad you're here. It's important to think about some things that are going on in the industry right now. We're in the middle of a sea change of what's going on with experiential design. The experience design revolution is upon us. Unreal Engine has been part of this process for a couple of years now. We're the fourth most used image renderer by design visualization experts. VFX and film people are using our software to do 3 shots in films like Star Wars Rogue One and many others. And the human race just won the Best Real-Time Graphics and Interactivity Award at SIGGRAPH. The point being is that the days of rendered images are coming to a close, and everybody wants to experience their design in real time, in milliseconds, not in minutes and hours. So what does frictionless workflow mean anyways? Well, when we announced the beta, we announced that it's our intention to really provide fidelity to the source scene. And so what that means is we want to take texture maps, shaders, material, geometry, lights, cameras, and make it easy for you to on-ramp them into Unreal Engine without a lot of the rework that it usually would take to set up all of your textures, lights, and cameras again once you import it into the engine with an FBX workflow. When it comes to CAD data, we want to make that workflow especially simple and easy. We now support directly into the engine several CAD formats, including Creo, SolidWorks, Pro E, and if you look at this list, a lot of other ones as well. The goal here is to provide automatic UV generation, scene organization, tessellated geometry, support for lights, cameras, and of course material substitution. Eventually, we want to make this a savable process so that you can easily repeat it with any type of geometry that you may want to bring into the engine. Once I receive my invitation for the beta and I accept it, I'm now ready to install Datasmith into Unreal Engine and into 3ds Max. Both of those things actually happen here in the launcher. Now, before I go into the library, let's just check to see which version of the engine we have installed. I have 4.17.2 currently. You're going to want to make sure that you have the current shipping version of the engine installed that matches the current shipping version of the plugin. That will be obvious when you go to install the plugin. It'll tell you which version it currently supports. So let's go ahead and go to the library, and you can see this is where you install the engine versions, and you'll notice at the bottom, this is where the Unreal Datasmith installer is located. This is where you actually install the plugin. So we'll go ahead and install it here. Once it's completed installing, we'll be ready to launch the engine. Now we're ready to launch the engine and simultaneously install the 3ds Max plugin. During the launch process, you'll be prompted to install the plugin for 3ds Max. Go ahead and follow the on-screen prompts. When the installation is complete, you'll be brought to the project browser where we can go ahead and launch a new project. Once the new project has completed loading, all you have to do is click on the Import button, and this is where you'll find all of the various CAD formats that you can import directly into Unreal Engine. You'll also see the Unreal Datasmith format. This is the format that we use to import our assets from 3ds Max. Speaking of 3ds Max, let's go ahead and launch it, and we'll find the uDatasmith format exporter there. Once in 3ds Max, we simply go File, Export, and change the format type to uDatasmith, and we can export directly from there. We'll take a look at some of the export options shortly, but for right now, that's where you find the importers and the exporter. So let's go ahead and send something over to Datasmith. Sending things over is actually pretty straightforward. What's important, though, is the thought and consideration you give into how your scene is organized and arranged. You'll notice over here that I'm using a layer system, so I have everything on lots of different layers. I have my cameras on their own layer, lights on their own layer. I have the structure itself, any wood trim, anything like that. You'll also notice that in the scene hierarchy, I have things that are explicitly named as much as possible. I'm really trying to avoid generic names wherever I can, because I'm going to get this list of objects in Unreal Engine, and I want to be able to differentiate between them as much as possible. So really, it's just kind of a best practice that you could use anywhere, but I really want to make sure that I'm using it in Unreal Engine. So I'm going to go ahead and go back over to my layers. Now, if I just do File Export, I could send everything over all at once. That's certainly a viable method. But you can also just send over things that are visible. And I'm actually going to send over a couple of different exports and build my scenes incrementally. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off everything that I don't want to send over. So I'm going to turn off my lights and my cameras. I'm going to turn off the decor. I'm going to turn off the furniture. And I really just want to send over the environment space itself, just the room. Okay, so let's go ahead and do File Export. So I'll do File Export, and we'll leave this name that is similar to the version that we're working with. And we'll call this space No Lights. And we'll go ahead and say save. And again, we're just exporting the visible objects. I could also export the selection if I wanted to, but for now, I'm just going to say okay to that, and we'll export it. And it's been fully exported. We get some warnings or just some log information about either texture maps or partially supported materials. Anything that you might want to troubleshoot later comes up in our outputs here. So we'll just go ahead and close that. Now let's go ahead and start exporting some of our other parts. We're going to go ahead and turn on the furniture. And we'll go ahead and hide the doors and windows. And so we'll just export our furniture here. I could turn off the background if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. We'll go into our environment and we'll turn off the map there. We'll go File, Export, and we'll save this, and we'll just give it a variation. We'll just say version 39, furniture, and we'll just export the visible objects. Again, we'll export this separately. Okay, so that's now exported, and we'll go ahead and turn our furniture off, and we'll turn our cameras on and our lights. I think we'll do those all in the same export. And you'll notice here with the lights, I have all kinds of different lights. I have light portals. I have regular lights. I have some generic area lights, things like that. I have some IES lights here as well. All of those are going to be supported as well. So we'll do export here. Okay, great. So now we're ready to switch over to Unreal Engine and bring all of those different Datasmith files into the engine. Okay, so let's go ahead and start bringing things into Unreal Engine with the Datasmith importer. Now, like I said, there's many different ways that you can bring stuff into the engine. I happen to do several different exports, so we're going to go ahead and bring it in pieces. So I'm going to go ahead to import, and first thing I'm going to import is the space without any lights. And we get our import options dialog box, and this is where we can choose what we want to bring in. I could bring in just geometry and textures. I don't have any lights in there, of course. I'm going to import my geometry as static mesh actor per object, or I could do a blueprint or a single static mesh actor with components that, either one. I'm going to set my light map resolution to 256. As I've previously mentioned, Datasmith automatically creates light map UVs for us. So I'm going to choose this resolution to be a little bit larger right off the bat. And we're going to go ahead and create a new level out of this. So we'll let this come in. It should come in fairly quickly because there's not a whole lot in the level. Okay, our environment has come in and it's going to go ahead and compile the shaders. And once that happens, we'll begin to see all of the different materials show up. This is one of the real advantages of Datasmith, because in previous workflows, this would take a lot of time where you'd have to go back and redo all of these textures manually. Okay, now that everything has compiled, we can see that pretty much our environment has come in. Everything that we had exported is present in the scene. Now let's go ahead and bring in our cameras and lights. I'll go ahead and bring in the other Datasmith file. So we'll do lights and cameras, and we'll just leave that all the same. And this time we're going to merge it to the current level. So we'll just bring this in. This should come in fairly quickly. Once our lights come in, I just need to do a quick adjustment to wrangle the viewport exposure into a range in which we can see the effect of our lights. And so there we are. And that's it. All of our lights are there. Our textures are there. We're seeing exactly what we would hope to see based on what we saw in 3ds Max. If we take a look at our scene hierarchy over in the World Outliner, we can see that our physical cameras are there, standard cameras are there. Our lights have been brought in properly. We're currently developing some lighting system compatibility features with Unreal Engine, so we have a couple of extra things in there that will be consolidated in future builds. But as you can see, everything that you would expect to see in Unreal Engine has come over from 3ds Max. And let's go ahead and get our environment turned on so that we can see this in a better context. Okay, and here is our lit scene. I'm going to go ahead and hide all of the sprites within the scene, so that's great. Let's go ahead and now import our furniture. So we'll bring in the rest of the scene information. And again, I'm going to leave this all the same. So we're going to merge this into the current level. Now this might take a little bit longer because obviously we have a lot more objects in here and we're generating all the UV light maps for those in channel 2. So we'll go ahead and just let this set for a second. Okay, all of our furniture has been brought in here. You can see the lighting is still pretty harsh. We haven't done a light bake yet, but we're going to go ahead and get to that. But let's just double check a couple of things to make sure that everything came in properly. For example, I'm going to check some of these cross beams up here. I'm going to load these into the static mesh editor, and I'm just going to double check the UV channels on here. You can see UV channel 0 has my layout, and UV channel 2 that looks pretty good. That has everything in there, so I'm not seeing any problems or anything. This is what was automatically generated by Datasmith coming into the scene on import. And again, just double checking to make sure that all of the scene hierarchy is still in place. Everything that we had set up in 3ds Max is there. For some of the instances, explicit objects are made, so you may see some things with different object names as what we had in 3ds Max. Again, this is part of the process. Layers in 3ds Max are also respected. You can also see that it generated a number of new layers based on some of the instancing that we had going on in 3ds Max. Datasmith does support instancing and XREF objects as well. So those are brought in and organized specifically. So at this point, we're ready to do a light bake and see how our lighting can turn out. And so here's our final scene that has been through the light baking process. You can see that all the textures are here. We have some nice shadows, good contact shadows, some ambient occlusion going, and everything that we brought in from 3ds Max is pretty much here as is. We did do some adjustments to exposure control, but other than that, all of the lights, all of the cameras, everything else came right from 3ds Max via Datasmith. Now that we've seen the workflow with Datasmith, let's take a closer look and get a better understanding of what Datasmith does do and doesn't do. Remember, Datasmith is still only in beta. We have a long way to go before we actually ship our first products to the public. So there's going to be a lot of change and evolution as we go on from this point in time. But there are a couple of things that we know that it doesn't do, and we should probably clarify that. The first thing that it does do is we convert the most popular V-Ray and Corona assets that may have been used inside a scene. Now, what this means is they're being converted to be used in the Unreal environment. It doesn't mean that we specifically support V-Ray shaders and materials or Corona shaders and materials. It means that we are converting them or translating them into Unreal-specific assets. Another thing that it does for you is the auto-conversion of unsupported image formats. If you have formats that are outside of the supported formats that are in the engine, it'll automatically conform those to be used within the engine. It will also automatically convert bump maps into normal maps. As great as all of that sounds, there are some things that Datasmith doesn't do. Datasmith doesn't fix bad geometry. So you're going to want to make sure that your geometry is well structured and has good surface topology. Really, a lot of the same best practices that you would employ for an offline rendered workflow. You want to avoid open edges where possible. You want to avoid overlapping vertices. You want to avoid isolated vertices and long triangles. You want to make sure that the smoothing is appropriate and that the surface topology will accept good-looking textures. It's worthy noting, though, that the CAD importer will have some topology tools that may fix common issues that are usually found within CAD workflows. And speaking of textures, it won't fix bad UVs. So if you have a lot of overlapping UVs or you get your geometry from other places and they have their own UVs on there, really you're going to have to be the one that's in control of proper UVs. Fortunately, the engine is very forgiving when it comes to overlapping textured UVs, but it's not as forgiving when it comes to overlapping UVs for light baking. Now, that being said, Datasmith will generate UVs for light map generation. So upon import into the engine, it'll automatically generate UVs that can be used in UV channel 2 for doing light baking. You can still generate your own UVs for the light bake, and you can do some fixing of some layouts in Unreal Engine. But if you want a custom UV set for doing your light bakes, you would still need to lay those out in 3ds Max. Another thing to be aware of is that Datasmith doesn't automatically reduce polygon counts. Whether you're in CAD or you're working with a huge data set, you may be concerned about engine performance, and one solution is to reduce polygons. You'll either need to do that in 3ds Max or your CAD application, or you can do it in Unreal Engine using the LOD tools, which are excellent, but Datasmith won't automatically reduce those polygons upon import. If you're using the CAD importer, you do have the ability to set tessellation parameters, but that's not necessarily the same thing as automatically reducing the number of polygons that are going to be in the scene. So you just want to be aware of your polygon counts, and it's important to understand where you need to make those polygon reductions before using Datasmith. So let's go ahead and take a look at the CAD importer. I'll go ahead and choose import. I already have an asset ready to go, and we'll bring it in, and you'll see some similarities with the 3ds Max importer in terms of geometry, materials and textures, lights and cameras. You can bring all of those in if they exist in your source CAD file. We'll adjust the light map resolution to be 256. Again, if you have a piece of geometry that does not have any UVs on it at all, it will automatically generate these UVs. And finally, down here are CAD import settings. This is where we can set the settings to really have the most impact on the surface topology that is generated. Remember, Unreal Engine uses polygons, and if you have parametric surfaces or other types of NURBS or mathematically based surfaces, those have to be topologized. So I'll go ahead and I'll crank up the normal tolerance so that this will import quickly, and I'll set our chord tolerance down to 5.5. And we're importing in millimeters, so I'll go ahead and merge it into the current level. And this should come in pretty quickly because I've set our tolerances fairly low. So you can see that just by setting a few settings, mainly the normal tolerance, we're able to get some nice looking geometry at varying levels of resolution. If I go ahead and open this up in the static mesh editor, bring this into the scene, and I go into our UV channel here, you can see that the UVs have automatically been generated so that we can build our light maps if we need to. Let's take a look at some tips for success in using Datasmith when it comes to textures. Go ahead and start using Unreal Engine supported textures as early as possible in your process. This will save export and import time when you're moving things over to the engine. Combine objects wisely. Consider consolidating materials when possible. The fewer materials you have to process in the engine, the better performance you'll get. Use something like Algorithmic's bitmap to material to generate maps for the engine. Now, we already discussed the fact that bump maps are automatically converted into normal maps. But if you want more control over the maps that you want to create, and even create some maps that are really leveraged strongly within the engine, like a roughness map, you want to be able to make those outside of the engine and have complete control over that process. Bitmap to material is a good solution for that. Also, UVs still matter. We did talk about UVs earlier, but honestly, good UVs are a matter of best practice. So you want to make sure that whenever possible, you're the one that's in control of your UVs. You're the one that's laying them out properly. And the time spent in proper UVs will translate into better looking surface topology within the engine. Some tips for success when using Datasmith when it comes to geometry include poly reduction. Using the LOD tool in Unreal Engine is actually quite good. All you have to do is load the individual mesh into the static mesh editor and assign LODs. You can either use the automated LOD system that's in there. You simply set the number of LODs that you want and some basic parameters, and it will crunch the polygons down for you. Or you can import other LOD models that you've created elsewhere. Either way, the LOD tool in Unreal Engine is actually quite good and really easy to use. Another tip is to combine objects wisely. You might want to consider attaching objects by location and not by type. For example, keep all the individual parts of an assembly together so that they act as one object in the engine, versus, say, all the bolts in the scene that may be distributed all throughout the scene as one object. If you do that, all of the bolts have to load just to see one of the bolts, versus if you just attach the object assembly as one object, and that way it will only load when it needs to be seen. And if you are doing a lot of object combination, just keep in mind that re-importing objects with same names replaces those objects with the same names in Unreal Editor. I've said this before, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is. Organize your scene. Use identifiable names, layers, or groups when organizing layers and objects. Give objects that are serving the same function similar prefixes. There's any number of tools in 3ds Max that will help you do this, like the renaming tool. But it's really important to be organized so that if you do have to delete and re-import objects continually, you'll always know that you're working with the right object. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Let me just recap a couple of the things that we've seen and make sure that we talk about some things that we may have not had a chance to take a close look at. The big one being is that we're striving to make Datasmith entirely convert the scene with a high level of fidelity to the source application. So this means that we want to support 3ds Max materials, V-Ray materials, Mental Ray materials, and Corona materials. Those will be converted into usable Unreal assets. We also want to support V-Ray and Corona lights and convert them into usable Unreal assets. We automatically generate UVs for light maps on objects that don't have them. So for both design visualization and CAD data, those objects will have UVs automatically generated for the purposes of light maps. We convert automatically unsupported image file types and textures. We convert bump maps into normal maps so that they can be used in Unreal Engine. In terms of scene organization, we're respecting the Scene Explorer in 3ds Max. So if you want to have multiple layers or groupings or things like that, all of your scene organization will come over to Unreal Engine with Datasmith. We support cameras in terms of the physical cameras that you have in 3ds Max and both the V-Ray camera. So in Unreal Engine, we have the cinematic camera, and so we're making those two cameras compatible together. Area lights are mimicked so that you can actually have nice, evenly distributed light. We support instances and scene XREF and object XREFs, so you don't have to worry about converting those to explicit objects before you move them into Datasmith. We take care of that for you. And we didn't show it in this webinar, but i2Soft's Rail Clone and Force Pack Pro plugins are supported as well. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate you spending your time with me today. We've covered a lot of ground. It is not too late to sign up for the Datasmith Beta. If you haven't signed up yet, go ahead and go to unrealengine.com/beta and register, and we'll roll those invitations out to you as soon as we can. If you're going to be at Autodesk University this year and you want to learn more about Datasmith, come and see my session, Modern Tools for CAD Data and Game Engines. That's at Autodesk University in Las Vegas. I want to say special thanks to some people who've made this webinar possible. They're listed on the screen, so just, again, thank you to those folks in providing content that we can show you here today. So now let's go ahead and open up the floor to questions. If anybody has any questions, now's the time to jump in and let's see what we can answer.